Deep thinkers are not wrong, but because they see what others don't. History proves it, from Socrates to Galileo to Tesla. Brilliant. People have been ridiculed, silenced, or ignored, not because they weren't intelligent, but because they made people uncomfortable. Schopenhauer, one of the most brutal and honest philosophers, believed that intelligence itself was a curse that isolated those who saw the world too clearly. But why is that? Why does society fight dissent? The answer lies deep in human psychology. Think about it. When you stand next to someone who is physically strong, you don't necessarily feel weak. You admire their strength. When you meet someone who is rich, you might envy them, but you don't feel personally attacked. But when you meet someone who is intellectually superior to you, something strange happens. Psychologists call it the mirror effect. A deep thinker not only brings new ideas, but also mirrors the limitations of the people around them, and people don't forgive easily. The presence of a deep thinker can make others feel inadequate, even if the deep thinker remains silent. But why is that? Why does intelligence cause so much discomfort, more than any other form of superiority? To understand this, we need to look at how our minds process different forms of superiority. If someone is physically stronger, we may see them as a leader or protector. If someone is wealthier, we may admire their success. Or do we strive for something similar? These qualities, strength, wealth, beauty, are external. We recognize them, but they do not necessarily challenge our basic self-concept. However, intelligence works differently than physical strength or material wealth. Intelligence is deeply connected to our identity. We define ourselves by our thoughts, our beliefs, our understanding of the world. When we encounter someone who thinks more deeply, someone who challenges what we take for granted, we may perceive this as a direct attack on our self-esteem. Instead of admiring intelligence, people unconsciously resist, not because the thinker is arrogant or dismissive, but because their presence forces others to confront their own limitations. That's why thinkers throughout history have been relegated to the margins of society. Their insights challenge not only ideas but also egos. People will do almost anything to protect their ego from discomfort. Think for a moment about your own experiences. Have you ever tried to introduce a profound or complex idea into a casual conversation, only to be met with an empty staircase or awkward silence? Have you ever noticed how quickly people change the subject when the discussion moves beyond superficial chatter? This is no accident. It's a defense mechanism. When people encounter a thinker, their minds go into self-preservation mode. Instead of being curious, they recoil. Instead of engaging, they reject. That's why intellectuals, philosophers, and visionaries often feel isolated, not because they want to be alone, but because society rejects them. Interestingly, studies show that self-confidence is often valued more highly than intelligence and social circle. People are naturally attracted to people who exude confidence, even if their ideas are superficial. That's why charismatic but simplistic thinkers gain more influence than deep thinkers who speak with nuance. History is full of examples, people, leaders, motivational speakers, and viral influencers who succeed by telling people what they want to hear rather than challenging them to think critically. At the same time, those who challenge conventional wisdom often struggle to find a broad audience. This is the paradox of intelligence. The more someone searches, the more they find themselves. Truth. The more they distance themselves from the majority, the more the mirror effect not only reflects the limitations of society, but also sheds light on why society resists change in the first place. But the question remains, if intelligence is so threatening, is there scientific evidence that people actually fear it? Neuroscience supports this. Studies show that the amygdala, the brain region responsible for fear and threat detection, becomes highly active when people feel intellectually inferior. Simply put, deep thought is not only frightening, but it triggers a primal survival response similar to the one we feel when we are threatened. But why does intelligence activate the same fear centers as a physical threat? The answer lies in the evolution of the human brain. For most of human history, survival depended not on being the smartest person in the room, but on acceptance by the group. Our ancestors lived in tribes where social harmony meant safety. Rejection by the group could mean death. Because isolation leads to vulnerability, the human brain is wired this way. Social acceptance takes precedence over intellectual ambition. When someone with high intelligence enters a social environment, they unknowingly disrupt the group's equilibrium. Their presence challenges existing beliefs, social norms, and group dynamics. This activates the brain's defense mechanisms as if they were dealing with a potential enemy rather than just a deep thinker. That's why many deep thinkers feel isolated, not because they lack social skills, but because their intelligence sets them apart in a world where belonging is more important than standing out. A 2021 Stanford University study found something even more shocking. Deep thinkers' projection is context-dependent. In personal contact with an intellectual, they feel less threatened. But in a group, their reaction to threat increases dramatically. The reason? As social status becomes more important in groups, people respond not only to intelligence per se, but also to how others perceive them. Conversely, if someone feels overshadowed by a deep thinker, they instinctively try to undermine or exclude that person. This protects their social status. This explains why deep thinkers often have candid conversations in private, but struggle in larger social circles. Psychologists have identified several cognitive distortions that explain why intelligence is often met with resistance. The Dunning-Kruger effect. People with low abilities often overestimate their intelligence. Highly intelligent people, on the other hand, tend to doubt themselves. This leads to friction. Those who know little often believe they know more than they actually do, leading them to ignore more profound thinkers. The status quo bias in the human brain favors familiar ideas over new, complex truths. Intelligence often leads to intrusive thoughts that make people uncomfortable. The backsliding effect occurs when people are confronted with information that contradicts their beliefs. They do not change their minds, but remain true to their existing beliefs. Deep thinkers often experience this reaction when they bring challenging ideas into the digital age. Social media has reinforced this rejection of intelligence. Algorithms prioritize engagement over depth. This means that controversial, emotionally charged content spreads faster than thoughtful, well-reasoned arguments. Simple, catchy, and often misleading buzzwords trump discussions of nuance. The more intellectual someone is, the harder it is to distill deep-thinking ideas into small pieces. As a result, society increasingly favors entertainment over enlightenment, making it even harder for deep thinkers to gain widespread acceptance. What does this mean for deep thinkers? The rejection of intelligence is not just social, but also biological, psychological, and cultural. It is embedded in human nature, reinforced by group dynamics, and amplified by modern technology. This does not mean that deep thinkers should stop sharing their ideas, but they should understand the forces that work against them. But if society rejects intelligence, what is it really embracing? The answer lies in comfort, a world where predictability is preferred to truth. Arthur Schopenhauer, one of the most brutal and honest philosophers in history. Wise minds throughout history have believed that intelligence is not a gift, but a curse. Unlike other thinkers who saw intelligence as the key to success, Schopenhauer believed that the smarter a person is, the harder it is for them to fit into society. But why is intelligence such a burden? Schopenhauer's philosophy was based on a concept he called the will. a blind, irrational force that governs all human behavior. According to him, most people live their lives guided by the will to live. That is, they strive for pleasure, comfort, and survival above all else. No matter how intelligent people are, they act differently. Instead of blindly following their instincts, they develop the will to truth, an insatiable desire to understand reality, even if it leads to discomfort. Ordinary people seek pleasure and avoid difficult truths. Deep thinkers seek truth, even if it leads to pain and isolation. This creates a fundamental divide between intellectuals and the rest of society, where most people find meaning in relationships, entertainment, and routine. Deep thinkers often feel disillusioned by these things and see them as a distraction from deeper, existential questions. Schopenhauer believed that the better a person understands human nature, the harder it is for them to relate to others. They see through lies and deception. Most social interactions consist of small talk, status games, and polite dishonesty. Deep thinkers, who value truth over appearance, often have a hard time participating. They crave depth, but society prefers simplicity. Most people prefer superficial conversations, while deep thinkers crave meaningful discussions. This makes it difficult for them to participate in everyday interactions without becoming bored or feeling isolated. They recognize the futility of human desires. Schopenhauer saw desire and ambition as illusions. He believed that most people strive for money, power, and connections, but deep thinkers often question the meaning of these pursuits. This makes them distant or indifferent to what excites the majority. That's why intelligent people often feel misunderstood. They feel alienated or even resentful of their very presence. It forces others to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves, and most people prefer to avoid this. Schopenhauer compared intelligence to heightened awareness, a blessing that feels more like a curse. He wrote that a high intellect often makes a person antisocial. His reasoning was simple. The more you understand, the less you can ignore. The more aware you are of the world's flaws, the harder it is to find happiness in it. The deeper you think, the lonelier you become. For Schopenhauer, happiness and intelligence were inversely proportional. He believed that ignorance, not wisdom, was the true key to happiness. That's why profound thinkers throughout history, such as Pascal Caffard, often struggled with depression, existential crises, and social isolation. This shows that Schopenhauer not only diagnosed the problem, but also offered solutions. He believed that while intelligence leads to solitude, there are ways for thinkers to cope with their isolation. Accept solitude. Schopenhauer saw solitude not as a punishment, but as a privilege. He believed that thinkers should use their time alone for intellectual and creative pursuits, rather than seeking validation from society or peers. Rather than trying to fit into the mainstream, Schopenhauer advised intelligent people to seek out others who think like them, whether through books, philosophy, or exclusive intellectual circles. He warned against blindly sharing profound insights with those who are not ready for them. Instead, he suggested that thinkers observe society, learn its patterns, and choose their words carefully. His teachings serve as a guide for modern deep thinkers struggling with societal rejection. While intelligence can lead to loneliness, it also brings freedom, wisdom, and a deeper understanding of life. Schopenhauer saw intelligence as a double-edged sword, a source of both strength and pain, while enabling one to see reality more clearly. It also creates distance from those who ultimately prefer illusions. Schopenhauer's philosophy confirms what we already suspect. Society is not afraid. Intelligence itself is afraid of something. Intelligence betrays deep thinkers. Rejected not because they are wrong, but because they are right too soon. So, if you have ever felt alone with your thoughts, then you know you are not finished. You only see the world as it really is. But does that mean that deep thinkers are doomed to isolation, or is there a way to navigate society while maintaining intellectual depth? The truth is, society is not designed to accept deep thinkers, but rather stability. Most people prefer comfort to truth. That is why shallow conversations, simple ideas, and repetitive content dominate the social space. But why does comfort take precedence over intellectual depth? Why does society resist change, even when it leads to progress? The answer lies in the very structure of human psychology and the way institutions shape our thinking from an early age. Fundamentally, the human brain craves security and predictability. Evolution has programmed us to avoid psychological discomfort, a phenomenon psychologists call cognitive ease. Cognitive ease. The brain prefers simple, familiar information because it requires less mental energy to process. If an idea is complex, nuanced, or unfamiliar, the brain perceives it as difficult and potentially dangerous. System justification theory explains why people defend the status quo, even when it hurts them. Rather than questioning authority or outdated beliefs, most people prefer to rationalize them because change feels too uncertain. Groupthink suggests that people prefer to conform to widely accepted IBD beliefs rather than risk social rejection by challenging them. This is why the majority reject intellectual deviations, even when they are based on truth. This deep psychological preference for comfort over complexity is why intellectuals, philosophers, and scientists often struggle to gain widespread acceptance, especially during their lifetimes. Consider today's digital world. Who gets the most attention on social media? Not intellectuals, but those who can reduce complex ideas to viral, feel-good sound bites. Think thought-provoking discussions. They struggle to gain traction because depth takes time, while viral content is instantly emotional and easy to digest. Algorithms reward engagement, and nothing excites people more than controversy, outrage, or humor, which often distract from rational intellectual discourse. Echo spaces emerge where people are only exposed to information that reinforces their existing beliefs, making them resistant to new perspectives. In this environment, thinkers who challenge the prevailing view are often recognized, misunderstood, or even attacked. This rejection of deep thinking doesn't just happen online. It starts in the institutions that shape our thinking, schools and workplaces. Educational systems claim to value intelligence, but in reality reward obedience over independent thinking. Students who memorize and recite information succeed, while those who question or challenge authority are often labeled troublemakers. The corporate world doesn't favor the smartest or most innovative employees. It favors those who fit into the culture and maintain the existing power structure. Political leaders who make bold, unpopular, logic-based statements often lose out to those who simply tell people what they want to hear. This explains why history's most famous intellectuals were outsiders. During their lifetimes, their ideas were seen as revolutionary rather than valuable. While society claims to value intelligence, innovation, and critical thinking, in reality, these qualities are only appreciated when they are widely accepted. Consider the following examples. Galileo was imprisoned for his discoveries, but today we celebrate him as a scientific genius. Van Gogh died in poverty, but his paintings are worth millions. Nikola Tesla revolutionized energy, but lived and died in oblivion. Society does not accept intelligence. When it challenges the norm, it celebrates it only afterwards, when it is no longer threatening. So, what can thinkers do when they struggle to be accepted? If you have ever felt misunderstood for your deep thinking, you are in good company. Throughout history, some of the most brilliant minds have gone unappreciated. During their lifetimes, they were ridiculed, persecuted, or ignored. Ideas were considered dangerous, disruptive, or simply too difficult for society to accept. These thinkers had one thing in common. They were ahead of their time and therefore suffered for their wisdom. Socrates, the father of Western philosophy, spent his life challenging conventional wisdom. He urged people to think critically, to question their own ideas, and to choose logic over blind tradition. But instead of being celebrated for his wisdom, he was accused of seducing the youth and showing disrespect for the gods. His real crime was encouraging people to think for themselves, even when he was offered the chance to escape. Socrates drank poison rather than abandon his principles. His famous words before his death, "An unexamined life is not worth living." His death sent a clear message. Society fears those who question its fundamental beliefs. Galileo's only crime was discovering the truth. When he proved that the earth revolves around the sun, he shattered centuries-old religious dogmas. The Church, which exercised its power through the control of knowledge, branded him a heretic. He was forced under threat of torture to publicly deny his own discoveries, even though we now know. During his lifetime, he was considered one of the greatest scientists in history. He lived under house arrest. His work was banned for almost a century. Galileo's story proves that even the most indisputable truths are rejected if they threaten existing power structures. Nietzsche's work was considered too radical and disruptive. He argued that traditional morality was flawed, that society was built on comforting lies, and that true power was achieved through the creation of one's own values. At the time, these ideas were too much for people. He was dismissed as crazy. His work is still ignored or misunderstood today. Nietzsche's philosophy influenced psychology, literature, and existentialism. His ideas about power, will, and morality continue to shape modern philosophy. This proves that society often rejects profound thinkers in the present, only to welcome them in the future. Tesla was a visionary. He dreamed of free energy for the world, wireless electricity, and technological advances that could have revolutionized humanity, civilization. But society, and especially the powerful, saw his ideas as a threat. Industrialists like Thomas Edison and J.P. Morgan made money selling electricity, so Tesla's idea of free energy was thwarted. Despite his genius, Tesla died alone in a small hotel room, forgotten and bankrupt. While others made fortunes from his stolen ideas, his life is a perfect example of how society often rewards businessmen and marketers over true visionaries. Alan Turing's work in cryptography helped end World War II. His programming skills saved millions of lives. His theories in computer science became the foundation of modern artificial intelligence. Instead of being honored, he was persecuted for his private life. In 1952, he was chemically castrated for his homosexuality, a decision that led to his tragic suicide at the age of just 41. Today, Turing is recognized as a hero, but in his time, society rejected him despite his incredible contributions. While most of the profound thinkers of history were men, Hippa of Alexandria was a rare exception. A female philosopher, mathematician, and astronomer who challenged the male-dominated intellectual world of ancient Rome. She taught scientific reasoning and rational thought, which brought her into conflict with religious authorities. In 415 AD, she was brutally murdered by a mob of religious extremists who saw her as a threat to their power. Her story illustrates a crucial pattern in history. Intellectual progress is often met with violent resistance. Each of these thinkers shared the same fate. They introduced ideas that were too progressive for their time. They were rejected, ridiculed, or punished during their lifetimes. Their ideas later became the foundation of human progress. Society is not afraid of intelligence per se, but rather of what intelligence represents: change. And that raises an important question. If history proves that society resists deep thinkers, what can you do if you yourself are one? Does that mean deep thinkers are doomed to solitude? Not at all. It just means you have to learn to navigate. Society, wisely, is not yet universally ready for deep conversations. Save your deepest thoughts for people who truly value you. You don't need millions of people to understand you, just the right ones. Find people who think like you. Whether it's in books, online communities, or intellectual circles, history's greatest thinkers have found ways to make deep ideas accessible. Einstein once said, "If you can't explain it, you simply don't understand it well enough." Learn to convey your depth without overwhelming others. Schopenhauer once said, "Talent hits a target that no one else can hit. Genius hits a target that no one else can see." Deep thinkers see the world differently, and that will always make some people uncomfortable, but that doesn't mean you should stop thinking deeply. Society needs deep thinkers, but doesn't always know how to embrace them. So, if you've ever felt like an outsider in your thoughts, remember, you're not. And even though society fears deep thinkers, it's deep thinkers who move humanity forward. If you enjoyed this video, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been rejected? Because you thought, we're talking. If you want more insights from history's greatest thinkers, just subscribe. We're still in the early stages.